Your brain is not the rational, logical computer you think it is. Every day, you make countless decisions believing you're thinking clearly and logically. But the reality is that most of your thinking is driven by mental shortcuts, biases, and errors that you're completely unaware of. These systematic errors don't just affect trivial decisions. They shape major life choices, financial decisions, professional judgments, and how you understand the world. Today, we're exploring Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, for his groundbreaking work on human judgment and decision-making. Over 5 decades, Kahneman and his research partner, Amos Tversky, discovered that human thinking is far less rational than we assume. Their findings revolutionized psychology, economics, medicine, and nearly every field that involves human judgment. What makes this book transformative is that it exposes the hidden machinery of your mind. Once you understand how your brain actually makes decisions, the shortcuts it takes, the biases it harbors, the errors it makes predictably, you can catch yourself before making costly mistakes. You can't eliminate these biases, but awareness gives you a fighting chance to work around them. Kahneman introduces 2 systems that drive how we think. System 1 operates automatically and quickly, with little effort and no sense of voluntary control. System 2 allocates attention to effortful mental activities, including complex computations and conscious choice. System 1 is intuition, fast, effortless, but error-prone. System 2 is reasoning, slow, deliberate, but lazy, and easily exhausted. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll explore how these 2 systems work, and often work against you. Understanding System 1 and System 2 and how they create illusions. The cognitive biases that systematically distort your thinking. How you make judgments under uncertainty and why you're usually wrong. Prospect theory, and why you make irrational financial decisions. How you experience life versus how you remember it. And practical strategies for recognizing and counteracting your own biases. If you've ever wondered why smart people make dumb decisions, why experts are often wrong, why you're overconfident about predictions that turn out false, or simply how to make better decisions by understanding how your mind actually works, this is essential. Let's discover how you think, fast and slow. Chapter 1, System 1 and System 2. Kahneman's fundamental insight is that you have 2 distinct modes of thinking that operate simultaneously and often conflict. Understanding this division is essential to understanding all human judgment and decision-making. System 1 operates automatically with no sense of voluntary control. When you see an angry face, immediately understand that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Detect that one object is farther than another, or comprehend simple sentences. You're using System 1. It's intuitive, associative, fast, and effortless. System 1 continuously constructs a coherent interpretation of what's happening in your world, connecting the present with recent past and anticipating the near future. System 2 requires attention and is disrupted when attention is drawn elsewhere. Calculating 17 times 24, filling out tax forms, checking the validity of a complex logical argument, or deliberately focusing on a particular person in a crowd, all require System 2. It's controlled, effortful, slow, and logical. System 2 has some ability to change how System 1 works by programming it with new skills. But this process is slow and requires significant effort. Kahneman explains that most of what you think and do originates in System 1. But System 2 takes over when things get difficult. System 2 is mobilized when you detect an error about to be made. The division of labor is efficient. System 1 handles routine decisions. System 2 activates for situations requiring special attention. But this arrangement has vulnerabilities. The first vulnerability is that System 1 cannot be turned off. When you look at words, you read them. When you see faces, you assess emotions. System 1 continuously generates impressions, intuitions, and feelings for System 2. When endorsed by System 2, impressions and intuitions become beliefs, and impulses become voluntary actions. Usually this works well. System 1 is generally accurate and quick. But System 1 has biases, systematic errors it's prone to make in specific circumstances. System 1 is good at detecting hostility in voices, detecting that one object is more distant than another, orienting to the source of sudden sounds, completing phrases like bread and butter, making simple inferences like the broken vase was on the counter, which was clean before something caused this, and understanding simple language. But System 1 struggles with logic, statistics, and avoiding jumping to conclusions based on limited evidence. System 2 is good at complex calculations, following rules, comparing items on several attributes, checking arguments for validity. But System 2 is lazy. It often accepts System 1's conclusions without scrutiny, even when System 1 is making predictable errors. This laziness is a source of most judgment errors. Kahneman introduces the concept of cognitive ease. When things are going smoothly, System 1 is in charge, and System 2 is barely engaged. Cognitive ease indicates that things are good. No threats, no major news, no need for effort or vigilance. When you experience cognitive strain, System 2 activates. Strain is triggered by surprises, effortful computations, ambiguity, or anything requiring more than routine processing. The author demonstrates how cognitive ease affects judgment with experiments. Statements in clear fonts seem more true than the same statements in hard-to-read fonts. Familiar words seem more true than unfamiliar ones. Rhyming statements seem more true than non-rhyming ones with identical meaning. This is because cognitive ease creates a feeling of familiarity and truth. Kahneman explains that System 1 excels at creating coherent stories from limited information. You see, Jane avoided speaking to her friend and immediately infer emotional conflict, intentions, and history. Your System 1 instantly constructs a narrative, but this strength becomes a vulnerability when System 1 constructs narratives from insufficient or misleading information, which System 2 then accepts without scrutiny. One critical principle: what you see is all there is. W-Y-S-I-A-T-I. System 1 constructs the best story from available information without considering information it doesn't have. It doesn't track missing information or ambiguity. This causes overconfidence. Your impressions feel complete, even when based on fragmentary evidence. Kahneman emphasizes that you can't prevent System 1 from operating. It runs automatically. But you can learn to recognize situations where System 1 is likely to make errors and slow down, activating System 2 to check the intuitive answer. This takes effort and vigilance, which is why most people don't do it most of the time. The chapter includes the famous bat and ball problem. A bat and ball cost $1.10 total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? System 1 immediately suggests 10 cents. But that's wrong. If the ball costs 10 cents and the bat cost $1 more, the bat cost $1.10, making the total $1.20. The correct answer is 5 cents. This problem demonstrates System 1's tendency to jump to conclusions and System 2's laziness in not checking the intuitive answer. Chapter 2. Heuristics and Biases. Kahneman dedicates substantial attention to the mental shortcuts, heuristics, that System 1 uses to make judgments quickly, and the systematic errors, biases, these shortcuts produce. The representativeness heuristic. When asked to judge probability or predict which category something belongs to, System 1 assesses how much the item resembles a typical member of the category. Kahneman provides the famous Linda problem. Linda is 31, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy and was deeply concerned with discrimination and social justice. Which is more probable? Linda is a bank teller, or Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement. Most people say the second option is more probable because it sounds more like Linda. But this violates basic probability. The probability of two events occurring together cannot exceed the probability of either alone. Linda being a bank teller and feminist cannot be more probable than just being a bank teller. System 1 ignores probability logic and judges based on representativeness. The availability heuristic people estimate the frequency or probability of events by how easily examples come to mind. After seeing news about plane crashes, people overestimate airline danger because examples are mentally available. After hearing about a friend's divorce, people overestimate divorce rates. This heuristic is useful. Things that happen frequently are generally easier to recall, but it creates biases because availability is affected by factors other than frequency. Drama, recent exposure, personal experience, and media coverage all increase availability. Kahneman explains that availability bias causes systematic distortions in risk perception. Dramatic deaths, terrorism, shark attacks, are overestimated, while common but mundane deaths, diabetes, asthma, are underestimated. This affects policy priorities, insurance decisions, and resource allocation in predictably irrational ways. Anchoring effects. When estimating uncertain quantities, people are influenced by any number they're exposed to, even if it's completely irrelevant. Kahneman's experiments showed that spinning a wheel showing random numbers affected people's estimates of the percentage of African nations in the UN. Those who saw higher numbers gave higher estimates, despite knowing the wheel was random. Anchoring affects negotiations, salary discussions, real estate pricing, and countless other situations. The first number mentioned becomes the anchor that pulls subsequent estimates toward it. Real estate agents are influenced by asking prices even when they know market values. Experienced negotiators and judges show anchoring effects. The effect is robust and difficult to avoid even when people know about it. The halo effect, the tendency to like or dislike everything about a person, including things you haven't observed. If you like someone's personality, you're likely to judge their intelligence and competence favorably without independent evidence. First impressions create halos that affect subsequent judgments. Kahneman explains that the halo effect reduces the complexity of the world. Rather than maintaining independent assessments of different traits, System 1 creates a simple, coherent story. She's wonderful, or he's terrible, This efficiency comes at the cost of accuracy, confirmation, bias, the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information that confirms existing beliefs while ignoring contradictory evidence. Once System 1 constructs a hypothesis, it seeks evidence that confirms it rather than testing it. This explains why first impressions are hard to overcome and why people maintain beliefs despite contrary evidence. The affect heuristic. Judgments and decisions are guided by likes and dislikes, with little deliberation. If you like something, you believe the risks are low and benefits high. If you dislike it, you believe risks are high and benefits low. This explains why people who favor nuclear power rate it as low risk and high benefit, while opponents rate it as high risk and low benefit. The affect heuristic creates coherent but often erroneous worldviews. Base rate neglect system. One focuses on case-specific information while ignoring base rates, statistical frequencies. Kahneman provides an example. Steve is described as shy, withdrawn, and interested in details. Is Steve more likely a librarian or farmer? Most say librarian because the description fits librarian stereotypes. But farmers outnumber librarians dramatically, making Steve more likely a farmer, despite the description. System 1 ignores base rates and focuses on representativeness. The planning fallacy people consistently underestimate how long tasks will take and overestimate how much they'll accomplish. This occurs because planning focuses on specific scenarios that might unfold, rather than on distributional information about similar past projects. Kahneman explains that even knowing about the planning fallacy doesn't prevent falling victim to it. The chapter concludes with Kahneman's insight that these heuristics and biases aren't flaws to be eliminated. They're features of how System 1 operates. System 1 evolved for a world where quick judgments based on limited information often meant survival. But modern life presents situations where these quick judgments lead us astray. The solution isn't eliminating System 1, but recognizing situations where it's likely to produce errors and activating System 2 to override intuitive judgments. Chapter 3. Overconfidence and the Illusion of Understanding. One of Kahneman's most important findings is that people are systematically overconfident about their knowledge, predictions, and abilities. This overconfidence affects every area of life and causes costly errors. Kahneman explains that the subjective confidence people have in their beliefs and judgments is not a reliable guide to their validity. The world is complex and uncertain, but our minds construct simple, coherent stories that feel complete. This creates an illusion of understanding. We believe we understand the past, which makes us feel we can predict the future. The author introduces the concept of narrative fallacy, our tendency to construct stories that make sense of the past, but misleadingly suggest the past was more predictable than it actually was. After an event occurs, we construct causal narratives explaining why it was inevitable. This creates the illusion that we could have predicted it, which makes us overconfident about predicting similar future events. A key example Kahneman provides is financial markets. Studies show that expert stock pickers perform no better than random selection over time, yet they're highly confident in their stock selections, construct elaborate narratives justifying choices, and are paid enormous sums for expertise that doesn't exist. The illusion of skill persists because success and failure look like skill and failure in hindsight. We construct narratives explaining why each prediction was right or wrong, maintaining belief in expertise despite statistical evidence of randomness. The author explains that skill exists in domains with stable regularities and opportunities for practice with feedback. Chess players and firefighters develop genuine expertise because their domains have learnable patterns and immediate feedback. But in domains with randomness, complexity, and delayed or ambiguous feedback, like stock picking, political forecasting, or clinical psychology, claims of expertise should be viewed skeptically. Kahneman introduces the concept of illusion of validity, the confidence we feel when a story we've constructed makes sense, regardless of the quality of the evidence. When all available information fits into a coherent pattern, we feel certainty, even if the information is sparse or unreliable. This explains why eyewitness testimony feels compelling, despite being notoriously unreliable. The witness's narrative is coherent and confident, which makes it persuasive. The chapter addresses hindsight bias, the tendency to believe after an outcome is known that we knew it all along. This bias makes history appear more predictable than it was and makes us overconfident about forecasting the future. It also creates unfair judgments of decision-makers whose decisions seemed reasonable given information available at the time, but look foolish in hindsight. Kahneman explains that experts are particularly prone to overconfidence. In domains without clear feedback, experts develop confidence through experience, but not accuracy. They learn the language and culture of their field, which increases their confidence and credibility with others. But they don't learn to make better predictions because the domain doesn't provide clear feedback on accuracy. The author provides guidance on recognizing and resisting overconfidence. First, differentiate between domains with genuine expertise possible, stable regularities, rapid feedback, and domains where expertise is mostly illusion. Second, when making predictions, identify the reference class, similar past situations, and use base rate information rather than focusing solely on case-specific details. Third, seek out information that contradicts your beliefs rather than confirming them. Kahneman introduces the concept of pre-mortem, a strategy for combating overconfidence. When planning a project, imagine it has failed spectacularly. Now explain why it failed. This exercise surfaces doubts and risks that optimistic planning obscures. It legitimizes dissent and reveals potential problems that polite consensus might bury. The chapter also addresses the illusion of control, people's tendency to overestimate their influence over events they can't control. Gamblers believe they can influence dice rolls through concentration or technique. Investors believe they can beat the market through skill, when evidence shows random portfolios perform as well. This illusion creates systematic errors in assessing risk and allocating resources. Kahneman emphasizes that overconfidence has real costs. Business ventures fail because overconfident entrepreneurs ignore base rate failure rates. Wars escalate because overconfident leaders believe quick victory is certain. Financial crises occur because overconfident investors and regulators believe they understand and can control risks. The cumulative cost of overconfidence across society is enormous. The chapter concludes with Kahneman's observation that knowing about overconfidence doesn't prevent it. The feeling of understanding and certainty persists even when you know intellectually that it's likely illusory. But awareness helps in specific situations. Before making important decisions, slow down, consult base rates, conduct premortems, and seek contradicting evidence. These practices don't eliminate overconfidence, but reduce its most damaging effects. Chapter 4: Prospect Theory and Irrational Financial Decisions. Kahneman and Tversky's prospect theory revolutionized economics by explaining how people actually make decisions under uncertainty, rather than how rational models assumed they should. The theory explains numerous financial behaviors that seem irrational from standard economic perspectives. Loss aversion. The fundamental principle is that losses loom larger than gains. Losing $100 feels worse than gaining $100 feels good. Kahneman's research found that losses are roughly twice as psychologically powerful as equivalent gains. This asymmetry explains many otherwise puzzling behaviors. Loss aversion explains why people hold losing investments too long. Selling means accepting the loss, which is psychologically painful. So people hold hoping to break even. It explains why people reject favorable bets. Offered a 50-50 chance to win $150 or lose $100, most decline, despite positive expected value, because the potential loss weighs more heavily than potential gain. Loss aversion affects negotiations. People weigh giving up something they have more heavily than acquiring something equivalent. It affects insurance decisions. People pay premiums that are mathematically poor value because they overweight the potential loss being insured against. The endowment effect: people demand much more to give up something they own than they'd pay to acquire it. Kahneman's experiments gave people mugs, then offered to buy them back or trade for equally valuable items. People demanded roughly twice what non-owners would pay. Merely owning something increases its subjective value because giving it up is framed as a loss. This explains many economic puzzles. Why people hold stocks they wouldn't buy at current prices. Why negotiations stall over splits that would be acceptable if roles were reversed. And why reforms that take away existing benefits face fierce resistance even when they'd be accepted if proposed as new benefits. Reference points and framing. Kahneman demonstrates that people evaluate outcomes relative to reference points rather than absolute levels. Whether something feels like a gain or loss depends on the reference point, which can be manipulated through framing. Classic example: 2 versions of a medical treatment decision. Version A: surgery has a 90% survival rate. Version B: surgery has a 10% mortality rate. Logically identical, but people are more willing to accept surgery described in terms of survival than mortality. The frame changes the reference point and therefore preferences. Framing affects financial decisions pervasively. Investments described as having an 80% chance of profit attract more interest than those having a 20% chance of loss, despite being identical. Credit card surcharges are more offensive than cash discounts, though economically equivalent, because surcharges are framed as losses, while discounts are framed as foregone gains. Risk attitudes and the fourfold pattern. Prospect theory predicts that people are risk-averse for gains, but risk-seeking for losses. When facing potential gains, people prefer certainty, accept $500 guaranteed, rather than 50% chance at $1,000. When facing potential losses, people gamble to avoid losses, accept 50% chance of losing $1,000, rather than certain loss of $500. This explains why people simultaneously buy insurance, paying to avoid low-probability losses, and lottery tickets, paying for low-probability gains, behaviors that seem contradictory in standard economic theory, but follow naturally from prospect theory. Mental accounting people categorize money into mental accounts, salary, windfall, inheritance, and treat accounts differently rather than viewing money as fungible. Someone might refuse to spend money from savings to buy something, but readily spend a windfall on the same item. This violates rational financial theory, but reflects how minds actually operate. Mental accounting explains why people maintain low-interest savings while carrying high-interest debt. The accounts are psychologically separate despite the economic irrationality. It explains why bonuses often fund purchases rather than debt reduction. Bonus money is in a different mental account than regular income. The sunk cost fallacy people continue investments because of past costs that can't be recovered, rather than evaluating whether continuing makes sense given future costs and benefits. You attend a boring concert because you paid for the ticket, even though the ticket cost is irretrievable and attendance wastes additional time. Businesses continue failing projects because they've invested millions, even though future costs exceed future benefits. Kahneman explains this through loss aversion and mental accounting. Abandoning the project means wasting the previous investment, a loss, while continuing creates hope of eventually breaking even or justifying the cost. The disposition effect. Investors hold losing stocks too long and sell winning stocks too quickly. This pattern, opposite of optimal tax and investment strategy, follows from prospect theory. Selling winners locks in gains, risk-averse for gains. Selling losers locks in losses, psychologically painful, so people hold, hoping to break even, risk-seeking for losses. The chapter concludes with Kahneman's insight that financial decisions aren't guided by logic, but by psychological principles captured in prospect theory. Understanding these principles explains your own financial behavior and allows recognizing and potentially overriding irrational impulses. But overriding intuition requires vigilance, because these patterns are deeply embedded in how System 1 processes decisions. Chapter 5. The experiencing self frees the remembering self. One of Kahneman's most profound insights concerns how we experience life moment to moment versus how we remember and evaluate those experiences. These two perspectives, the experiencing self and the remembering self, often conflict with surprising implications for how we make decisions and pursue happiness. Kahneman explains that the experiencing self lives in the present, experiencing each moment as it occurs. The remembering self keeps score and makes decisions. But memory doesn't retain all moments equally. It constructs stories from selected moments, focusing on peaks, best or worst moments, endings, and significant transitions while largely ignoring duration. The author demonstrates this through the cold hand experiment. Subjects immerse one hand in painfully cold water for 60 seconds, then remove it. Later, they immerse the other hand for 60 seconds at the same painful temperature. But then, the water warms slightly for an additional 30 seconds before removal. Which experience would they choose to repeat? Logically, the first, it has less total suffering, 60 seconds of pain versus 60 seconds of equal pain plus 30 seconds of moderate pain. But most people choose to repeat the second because it ended better. The remembering self ignores duration and focuses on peak discomfort and the ending. The second experience actually involved more suffering, but is remembered more favorably. This finding has profound implications. Kahneman introduces the peak-end rule. Memories of experiences are determined largely by the most intense moments, peak, and how it ended. Duration has surprisingly little impact on memory. A colonoscopy that's extended by leaving the scope in at low discomfort is remembered more favorably than a shorter but more uniformly painful procedure, despite involving more total pain. The author explains that we make choices based on anticipated memories rather than anticipated experience. We choose vacations, careers, and purchases based on how we think we'll remember them, which often differs from how we'll experience them. A vacation might involve many uncomfortable moments, but create wonderful memories if peaks are good and endings are satisfying. This distinction explains many puzzling preferences. Why do people endure uncomfortable experiences for the story? Because they're optimizing for memories rather than moment-to-moment experience. Why do people save experiences like expensive wine for a special occasion, even though this means never actually experiencing them? Because they're prioritizing potential memories over actual experience. Kahneman addresses the paradox. Which self should guide our decisions? The experiencing self lives our life moment to moment. The remembering self constructs narratives and makes decisions. Both matter, but they don't always agree. A life that's pleasant moment to moment, but without memorable peaks, might be better for experiencing self than remembering self. A life with dramatic peaks and valleys might create rich memories while involving more moment-to-moment suffering. The author discusses implications for happiness research. When researchers ask, "How happy are you with your life?" they're asking the remembering self. When they track moment-to-moment experience, they're measuring experiencing self. These give different answers. Success, achievement, and memorable experiences matter more to remembering self. Daily routines, time use, and stress matter more to experiencing self. Kahneman's research found that moment-to-moment happiness is most predicted by who you're with and what you're doing, not by major life circumstances like income above a threshold. But life satisfaction, remembering self, is more affected by achievements, social comparison, and narrative coherence. This distinction illuminates choices about time use. Time spent commuting is miserable for experiencing self, but barely registers for remembering self, unless exceptional events occur. Time spent with friends is good for both selves. Time spent achieving goals might involve moment-to-moment stress, bad for experiencing self, but creates satisfaction for remembering self. The chapter addresses the focusing illusion. People overestimate the impact of circumstances they focus on. When asked how much happiness wealth brings, people focus on wealth and imagine life with more money, overestimating its impact on moment-to-moment experience. In reality, people adapt to circumstances and attention shifts elsewhere. This illusion affects countless decisions. People choose careers, move locations, or make purchases expecting happiness, impacts that don't materialize because they're overweighting the focused factor while ignoring adaptation. Kahneman emphasizes that neither self is right. They're both real and both matter. But awareness of the distinction helps make more informed choices. If you're optimizing purely for memories, you might endure unnecessary present discomfort. If you're optimizing purely for moment-to-moment experience, you might forego meaningful accomplishments that create life satisfaction. The chapter concludes with Kahneman's suggestion to consider both selves when making major decisions. Will this choice improve my moment-to-moment experience? Will it create memories I'll value? Sometimes these align, sometimes they conflict. Conscious awareness of the trade-off leads to more intentional choices about how to live. Chapter 6. Practical Strategies for Better Decisions. In the final sections, Kahneman provides practical guidance for improving judgment and decision-making based on his research. While you can't eliminate biases, awareness and specific strategies can reduce their impact. Recognizing when to trust intuition. Intuition is valuable in domains with stable regularities and opportunities for practice with feedback. Chess, firefighting, nursing. Intuition is unreliable in unpredictable domains without clear feedback. Stock picking, political forecasting, clinical psychology. The key is distinguishing which domain you're in. Trust intuition in the first, be skeptical in the second. Slowing down for important decisions. System 1 operates automatically, but System 2 can intervene if you slow down. For important decisions, explicitly engage System 2 by asking, am I jumping to conclusions? What evidence would contradict my intuitive answer? What's the base rate for this type of situation? This conscious intervention catches many errors. Using algorithms and checklists. Simple algorithms often outperform expert judgment because they're consistent and unbiased. Medical diagnosis algorithms outperform doctors. Hiring algorithms outperform interviews. The psychological resistance to algorithms is strong. We trust human judgment, despite evidence that simple formulas work better. Kahneman advocates using algorithms for predictable, repeated decisions while reserving judgment for unique, high-stakes situations where human insight adds value. Checklists prevent simple errors in complex situations. Pilots use pre-flight checklists. Surgeons use surgical checklists. Despite expertise, these professionals follow checklists because System 1 can miss steps. For important decisions, create checklists of factors to consider and biases to check for. Adopting the outside view. Most planning uses the inside view, focusing on the specific situation, constructing scenarios for how things might unfold. This leads to overconfidence and planning fallacy. The outside view asks, what happened in similar past situations? What's the base rate? This statistical perspective is usually more accurate than inside view scenarios. Before estimating project duration, ask what similar projects actually took. Before predicting success, ask what percentage of similar ventures succeeded. This grounds predictions in reality rather than scenarios. Conducting pre-mortems. Before committing to a plan, imagine it has failed spectacularly. Now explain why. This surfaces doubts and risks that optimistic planning obscures. It legitimizes dissent. People are reluctant to criticize plans in progress, but readily identify failure causes once failure is assumed. Pre-mortems improve planning without the painful experience of actual failure. Establishing decision processes. For repeated decisions, establish processes that reduce bias. Separate information gathering from decision-making. Require decisions to be justified with evidence before intuitive judgments are revealed. Use structured approaches rather than unstructured interviews or evaluations. Recognizing affect heuristic. When you feel strong, positive, or negative emotions about an option, recognize that affect is driving judgment. Ask, would I see risks and benefits differently if I felt neutral? Deliberately list reasons the affect might be misleading. Framing decisions broadly narrow. Framing creates loss aversion and risk-seeking. Broad framing reduces these biases. Rather than evaluating each investment decision in isolation, frame it as one of many investments in a portfolio. Rather than evaluating each negotiation as win or lose, frame it as one of many interactions with ongoing partners. Avoiding sunk cost fallacy. Regularly ask, would I choose this course of action if starting fresh today, ignoring past investments? If no, change course. Past costs are irretrievable. Continuing just because you've invested is irrational. Building feedback loops in domains where you make repeated judgments. Keep records of predictions and outcomes. This creates feedback that improves calibration. Weather forecasters are well calibrated because they receive immediate, clear feedback. Most professionals don't track their predictions systematically, preventing learning from errors. Creating implementation intentions. Vague intentions rarely become actions. Specific plans work better. If situation X arises, then I will do Y. This pre-commits System 2's response, preventing System 1 from reacting impulsively. Questioning the narrative. When you've constructed a coherent story explaining something, ask, what information am I missing? What alternative explanations exist? The story might be correct, but vis iete, what you see is all there is, means you're probably overconfident. Seeking disconfirming evidence, deliberately search for evidence that contradicts your beliefs. This counters confirmation bias. Ask, what would I need to believe if the opposite were true? This opens consideration of alternatives that confirmation bias closes off. Using reference class forecasting. Rather than predicting based on case-specific details, identify the reference class similar past cases and use base rates from that class. Adjust up or down from the base rate based on specific information, but anchor on statistical reality rather than scenarios. Kahneman concludes with realistic expectations. You can't eliminate biases. They're built into System 1's architecture. But awareness lets you recognize situations where biases are likely and activate System 2 to check intuitive judgments. Organizations can implement processes that reduce bias in repeated decisions. And individuals can improve judgment in specific high-stakes decisions through deliberate System 2 engagement. The goal isn't perfect rationality. That's impossible and perhaps undesirable. The goal is reducing costly errors by recognizing when you're vulnerable to bias and applying appropriate correctives. We've explored Daniel Kahneman's groundbreaking insights into how we actually think. The two systems driving our minds, the heuristics and biases that systematically distort judgment, overconfidence and illusion of understanding, irrational financial decisions explained by prospect theory, the conflict between experiencing and remembering selves, and practical strategies for making better decisions despite our built-in biases. The power of thinking fast and slow is that it reveals the hidden machinery of your mind. Once you understand that you're not the rational calculator you assumed, that your intuitions are often wrong in predictable ways, that your memories distort experiences, and that confidence is not a guide to accuracy, you can't unsee it. This awareness won't make you perfectly rational, but it gives you a chance to catch yourself before making costly errors. Let's recap the core insights. You have two systems, Fast, intuitive System 1 and slow, deliberate System 2. System 1 uses heuristics that create systematic biases. You're overconfident about your knowledge and predictions. Losses loom larger than gains, creating irrational financial behavior. You remember peak moments and endings, not duration. And you can improve decisions by recognizing when to trust intuition, when to slow down, and how to structure decisions to reduce bias. Here's your challenge. This week, catch yourself using one of the heuristics we discussed. Notice when you're making judgments based on representativeness, availability, or anchoring. Slow down and engage System 2. Ask yourself, what's the base rate? What evidence contradicts my intuition? Am I overconfident because this story feels coherent? Just recognizing one instance of bias in action will change how you see your own thinking. You'll start noticing these patterns everywhere. And occasionally, in important decisions where it really matters, you'll catch yourself before making an error you would have made unconsciously before. If this summary revealed how your mind actually works in ways that surprised you, let me know in the comments what insight was most valuable. And if you want the complete depth of Kahneman's research with all the experiments, examples, and implications, pick up Thinking Fast and Slow. It's dense and challenging, but it might be the most important book about human judgment ever written. Until next time, remember, you're not as rational as you think, but knowing that makes you a little bit more rational. Your intuitions will still mislead you, but occasionally, when it matters most, you'll recognize what's happening and think more carefully. That's the best we can do, and it's enough to make a real difference. Thank you for watching.